Imagine a place where the sun never brings warmth, only the start of a new terror. Imagine a world where a doctor's coat doesn't mean a cure, but a death sentence. In 1945, when Allied soldiers finally pushed through the gates of the Nazi camps, these men who had survived the bloodiest battles in history, fell to their knees and wept. They didn't see a prison. They saw a factory designed to break the human soul into pieces. How does a system become this organized at being evil? Why does a stethoscope turn into a scalpel of torture? Today, we pull back the curtain on the darkest chapters of the human story. We look at the methods that turned men into numbers and life into a nightmare. A white coat. In any city, in any hospital, it is a symbol of safety. It means help is here. But inside the wire of a Nazi camp, that white coat was the most terrifying sight a prisoner could see. It meant you were no longer a human being with a name, a family, or a soul. You were a subject. You were a piece of data, a lab rat in a human skin. Between 1942 and 1945, the Nazi medical system didn't just fail, it inverted. Over 30 different types of medical experiments were running across the camp system at any given time. We aren't talking about small mistakes. We are talking about 16,000 documented victims. Nearly a quarter of them died while the doctors were still holding their stopwatches. At the Dachau camp, the sky was the first weapon. The Luftwaffe wanted to know, how long can a pilot survive if his plane is shot down at 40,000 feet? To find out, they didn't use simulations. They used people. They built low-pressure chambers. They locked prisoners inside and sucked the oxygen out. Imagine the lungs screaming for air that isn't there. Imagine the pressure building inside your skull until your vision blurs. Survivors describe men clawing at their own faces, convulsing on the floor, while officers in polished boots stood outside the glass, taking notes. They didn't see a man dying. They saw a chart showing altitude limits. When the air didn't kill them, the water did. The hypothermia trials were even worse. They wanted to know how to save German sailors from the freezing North Sea. Their solution: take a prisoner, strip him naked, drop him into a tank filled with ice and water. A doctor named Sigmund Erasure would stand by, watching the body's core temperature drop degree by agonizing degree. The skin turns blue, then gray, then white. The heart begins to flutter like a trapped bird. The prisoners would beg for death, but the experiment only ended when the heart stopped beating. In the women's camp of Ravensbrück, the torture was even more intimate. They called the victims rabbits. Why? Because they were used like lab animals. Surgeons would take healthy Polish women and slash their legs open with dirty scalpels. They didn't just cut, they stuffed the wounds with rusted nails, jagged glass, dirt, and deadly bacteria. They wanted to simulate battlefield infections. They wanted to see if new drugs could stop the rot. Most of these women never walked again. Their legs became maps of scars and twisted muscle, a permanent reminder of the day science turned into a butcher. This was the organized side of the nightmare. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger. It was a cold, calculated decision made by men with degrees and titles. They used the language of healing to justify the act of destroying. And for those who survived the lab, the nightmare was only shifting shapes. From the cold steel of the operating table, they were marched toward a punishment that needed no tools at all, only the weight of their own bodies. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The doctors leave. The white coats vanish. But the torture doesn't stop. It just changes its face. Now, the Nazis use a weapon that is always available: gravity. They use your own weight. They use your own bones. They use the very act of standing, the most basic human posture, and they turn it into a slow-motion execution. This is the torture of the Gstazel, the standing cells. It is a punishment that leaves no scars on the skin but shatters every nerve in the body. Imagine a box. It is not a room. It is a stone upright coffin. It measures 90 centimeters by 90 centimeters. In some camps, it is even smaller. Now, imagine the guards forcing 4 grown men into that space. One by one, they are shoved in, chest against back, shoulder against shoulder. The door slams shut. The iron bolt slides home. Inside, there is total, suffocating darkness. There is no room to sit. There is no room to crouch. There is no room to even bend a knee. You are forced to stand perfectly upright, locked in a human knot with 3 other terrified souls. At first, it is just uncomfortable. Your shoes feel tight. Your calves begin to ache. But as the hours pass, the ache turns into a fire. Because there is no space to move, your blood cannot circulate. It pools in your feet. Your ankles swell until the skin feels like it's going to burst. In Block 11 at Auschwitz, these cells were a death sentence for the living. The guards didn't keep you there for an hour. They kept you there for the night. Then the next day. Then the next night. Some survivors talk about being trapped in that stone box for 10 days straight. Think about that. 10 days without ever bending your legs. The air is the next thing to go. There is only one tiny hole, the size of a coin, for 4 men to breathe. The air becomes thick and hot. It smells of sweat, fear, and the waste of bodies that have no place to go. Men begin to hallucinate. In the pitch black, the walls seem to shrink. You feel the person next to you shaking, but you can't reach out to comfort them because your arms are pinned to your sides. You start to hear voices. You start to see lights that aren't there. Your mind tries to escape the box because your body cannot. The physical toll is a slow collapse. The spine feels like it is being compressed by a mountain. The lower back muscles seize up into hard, painful rocks. Sleep is impossible. If you lose consciousness, you don't fall. The pressure of the other men keeps you upright. You are a ghost, awake but dead, standing in a grave that hasn't been buried yet. When the door finally opens, the men don't walk out. They spill out. They collapse like wet rags onto the cold concrete. Their legs are so swollen they look like trunks of trees. Their minds are fractured. But the SS doesn't offer a bed. They don't offer water. They offer a kick. Get up, they scream. If you can't stand after being forced to stand for a week, you are considered useless. And in the camps, useless means the end. This was the cruelty of the standing cell. It was designed to turn a man's own strength against him. It made his own skeleton his torturer. It proved that you didn't need a whip or a gun to break a human being. You just needed 4 walls and the refusal to let a man sit down. Once you leave the darkness of the standing cells, you realize the Nazis have a twisted obsession with the human arm. They know that the body is a delicate machine of hinges and sockets. They know that if you pull a joint the wrong way, the soul screams. This brings us to a torture so simple, so quiet, and so devastating that it became a signature of camp life, the pole. Or as the prisoners called it, the Pfahlhängen. Imagine a sturdy wooden post or a metal hook in the ceiling. A guard commands you to put your hands behind your back. This is not a normal position. Now, he takes a thick, rough rope and ties your wrists together. He loops the other end over the hook. Then, he pulls. Slowly, your feet leave the floor. The weight of your entire body, every pound of bone and muscle, is suddenly hanging from your shoulder joints. But your arms are twisted backward. This is the opposite of how the body is built. Within seconds, the muscles in your chest feel like they are being sliced by a hot knife. Then, you hear it. A sickening pop. That is the sound of your humerus bone tearing out of its socket. The shoulders dislocate. The tendons snap like overstretched rubber bands. This wasn't a quick punishment. Guards at camps like Mauthausen or Sachsenhausen would leave men hanging like this for hours. The pain is so sharp, so electric, that most people pass out within the first 10 minutes. But the guards have a routine. They don't want you to sleep. They throw a bucket of icy water into your face. They slap you until your eyes open. They want you to feel every second of the gravity pulling your torso away from your arms. What makes this torture so effective in the eyes of the SS is that it leaves the victim useless. If you survive the pull, your arms often remain frozen in a grotesque, bent shape. You cannot lift a spoon to your mouth. You cannot button your own shirt. You cannot work. And as we know, in the logic of the camps, if you cannot work, you are a target for the next selection. But for some guards, the pole was too quiet. They wanted movement. They wanted a spectacle. This led to the creation of the Boga, the Boga swing. Named after its inventor, Wilhelm Boga, this was a device that turned a human being into a pendulum of agony. The setup was a heavy iron bar suspended by chains. The prisoner was stripped naked and forced to crouch. Their hands were tied to their ankles, making them a tight, vulnerable ball of flesh. The iron bar was then slid between their knees and their elbows. They were hoisted up, hanging upside down, their buttocks and back exposed. Then, the swinging began. As the prisoner swung back and forth, guards stood on either side with steel pipes or leather whips. Every time the body swung past, a blow landed. Crack. The skin on the back splits. Crack. The kidneys are bruised. Crack. The spine is hammered. The swinging motion makes it impossible for the victim to brace themselves. They are just a piece of meat on a hook, oscillating through a storm of steel. Survivors say the room where the Boga swing lived smelled of old blood and fresh vomit. Many victims died on the bar as their internal organs collapsed from the vibration of the blows. Others were left with shattered hips and broken ribs, dumped in the dirt to wait for a death that couldn't come fast enough. The SS called this discipline. But it wasn't about rules. It was about the joy of seeing how much a human frame could bend before it snapped. It was about making sure that every prisoner knew that their body was not their own. It belonged to the rope, the bar, and the swing. In the world outside the wire, weather is a conversation. In the camps, weather was a death warrant. The Nazis realized very quickly that they didn't need to waste bullets if they could just let the sky do the work. They turned the sun, the wind, and the snow into active participants in their torture routine. This was the terror of the apple, the roll call, where nature was sharpened into a blade. Imagine it is 3 in the morning. The temperature is 20 degrees below zero. A whistle screams through the barracks. You are forced out of your wooden bunk, wearing nothing but a thin, striped rag made of ersatz paper cloth. No coat, no socks, often no shoes. You are marched into the center of the yard, the Appelplatz. The rule is simple: stand perfectly still. The SS demand a perfect head count. If one person is missing, or if one guard miscounts, the entire camp must wait. You stand there in the biting wind. The cold isn't just a feeling, it's an attack. It starts by numbing your fingers. Then it moves up your arms. It feels like your blood is turning into shards of glass. Survivors recall the statues of ice. These were men who had stood so long in the snow that their feet froze to the ground. If they moved to rub their hands, they were beaten. If they stamped their feet to keep the blood flowing, they were shot. So, they stood. They stood until their heart rates slowed to a crawl. At Auschwitz, one roll call in the dead of winter lasted nearly 24 hours. By the time the guards were satisfied, dozens of men didn't move when the order was given to disperse. They remained standing, frozen solid, dead on their feet. But the cold wasn't always a byproduct of the roll call. Sometimes, it was a deliberate, calculated experiment. This was the work of the cold water doctors. They wanted to know how to revive a human body that had nearly frozen to death. Their patients were prisoners thrown into tanks of ice water. Imagine the shock. The water hits your skin, and your heart jumps. You lose control of your breathing. You gasp, swallowing the freezing liquid. The doctor stands there with a thermometer, waiting for your body temperature to hit 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the point where the mind goes dark. They watched as skin turned a bruised purple, then a deathly gray. If the subject died too quickly, they simply signaled for the next one. They were measuring the distance between life and death in degrees Celsius. When they weren't using the cold, they used the wet. In camps like Buchenwald, the SS used water dousing as a form of sport. They would take a prisoner, often an elderly person or a religious dissenter, and spray them with a high-pressure fire hose in the middle of winter. The force of the water alone was enough to break ribs, but the real torture was the aftermath. The prisoner was left in the yard, soaking wet, as the wind turned their clothes into a suit of ice. They would shiver until their muscles tore from the tension. They would shiver until their spirits snapped. For the Nazi guards, the sky was the perfect accomplice. It was everywhere. It was inescapable. It reminded the prisoner every single second that even the air they breathed was owned by the Reich. From the frozen yard, the only escape was back to the barracks. But as we will see, there was no sanctuary there. Even the basic act of eating was turned into a slow, agonizing process of erasure. In the camps, the Nazis discovered that the most effective way to destroy a man was to make him a stranger to his own body. They didn't just want to kill, they wanted to humiliate. They wanted to strip away the civilized layer of a human being until only raw, animal desperation remained. This was a psychological war fought with filth, hunger, and shame. It began with the processing. When you arrived, you were stripped naked. In a world of strangers, privacy is the last shred of dignity. The SS took that first. Men, women, and children were forced to stand exposed under the glare of searchlights. Guards mocked them. They took photos. They used dull, rusted blades to shave every hair from the head and body. This wasn't for hygiene. It was to turn everyone into a nameless, identical number. When you look in a mirror and don't recognize your own face, the breaking of your will has begun. Then came the cleaning. You were pushed into showers. Sometimes the water was scalding, burning the skin. Other times it was ice cold. And sometimes there was no water at all, only the spray of high caustic chemicals like DDT. These chemicals burned the eyes and the lungs. They left the skin raw and weeping. If you survived the bath, you were given a thin set of rags, clothes taken from those who had already been sent to the gas chambers. You were wearing the memory of death. But the most persistent torturer was hunger. In the camps, food was not nourishment. It was a weapon of slow-motion execution. The average prisoner received a ration that would starve a child. A cup of ersatz coffee made of burnt acorns for breakfast. A bowl of watery soup for lunch, usually just grass or rotten turnip peels. A single crust of bread for dinner, sometimes shared between 5 men. The body begins to eat itself. First, the fat disappears. Then, the muscle. Your ribs begin to push against the skin like the bars of a cage. Your teeth loosen in your gums. Your eyes sink into your skull until you look like a living skeleton, a musulman, as the prisoners called those who had given up. Thirst was even more cruel. In some blocks, guards would turn off the water for days as a group punishment. Men would lick the condensation off the stone walls. They would fight over a muddy puddle in the yard. In the dark cells of Block 11, some prisoners were left with no food or water until the silence from the cell told the guards the job was done. The final layer of this torture was the filth. The barracks were a nightmare of disease. Imagine a room built for 50 people holding 500. You sleep 3 to a wooden bunk, so tight you can only turn over if everyone turns at once. There are no toilets, only a bucket that overflows in the night. Typhus, dysentery, and cholera spread like wildfire. The guards called the prisoners subhuman because they lived in filth, but it was the guards who created the filth. They forced prisoners to clean latrines with their bare hands. They forced them to stand in their own waste for hours during roll call. By the time a prisoner died, they had often been robbed of their name, their health, and their dignity. They died as a number, in the mud, while a guard watched with a stopwatch. This wasn't just death. It was the total erasure of the human soul. In the Nazi camp system, death was not the end of the nightmare. It was merely the final stage of a factory line. The Nazis didn't just want to kill a person. They wanted to prove that the person never mattered at all. They wanted to turn the human body into a commodity, a piece of waste to be processed, recycled, or discarded. This is the most haunting part of the linguistic DNA of this history, the total denial of any dignity, even in the grave. When a prisoner finally collapsed from the beatings, the hunger, or the standing cells, their body didn't receive a name. It received a destination. In camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka, the Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to work in the death machinery, were ordered to strip the gold from the teeth of the dead. They shaved the hair from the corpses to be woven into industrial felt or used for mattress stuffing. They took the shoes, the glasses, and the artificial limbs to be sent back to Germany. Every part of the human being was harvested like a crop. Then came the mass graves. Imagine being a survivor, forced to carry the bodies of your friends, your neighbors, or your own father. You are told to throw them into a deep pit in the earth. No prayers, no markers. The guards stood by, smoking cigarettes, watching as the soil was shoveled over hundreds of nameless faces. They wanted to make sure that the world would never know these people existed. They wanted to erase the evidence of their crimes by burying it deep in the mud. In the larger camps, the smoke never stopped. The crematoria worked 24 hours a day. The air in the surrounding villages was thick with a heavy, sweet, greasy smell that the locals could never forget. The ashes were often dumped into nearby rivers or spread on fields as fertilizer. The Nazis turned the human soul into ash and the human body into dirt. This was the ultimate psychological torture for the living. Every day, you looked at the chimney. You knew that your final act on this earth would be to disappear into that gray smoke. You knew that no one would ever know where you fell. This fear, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of having your life reduced to a pile of ash, was the shadow that followed every prisoner from the moment they entered the gate. The linguistic DNA of the Nazi camps is a story of organized cruelty. It shows us what happens when science loses its heart, when power loses its mercy, and when humans lose their sight of each other. Even today, the world struggles to understand the full picture. The survivors tell us that the scars on their skin eventually faded, but the cold that seeps to the bones never truly leaves. The story of these camps is a warning. It is a reminder that the line between a civilized society and a factory of torture is thinner than we think. It is held together only by our choice to see the person next to us as a human being, not a number. As the gates finally opened in 1945, the world saw the truth. It saw the standing cells, the ropes, the white coats, and the piles of ash. And as we look back today, we must ensure that the sound of those iron bars and the clank of those chains never fades into the silence of history. The night may ended, but the lesson is eternal. The world must remember, so that the white coat once again means safety, and the sky once again means hope. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.